everyone, I'm Rebecca and welcome back to my channel. I've been wanting to make a video about my favorite period costume movies for a really long time, and I figured that while we're all wanting to stay inside out of the cold and cozy up in front of the TV, it would be the perfect time to do so. I decided to keep this video strictly to movies that are set in the 19-teens or prior, so you won't see any TV shows or miniseries on this list, and nothing set in the last 100 years. If you enjoy this video though, I would be happy to do another video about the best historically costumed TV shows, as I think that a lot of everyone's favorites may actually be on that list and not on this one. By the way, I did also poll all of you over on Instagram, and I asked you for your favorite period costumed movies. So the first half of this video will be my favorites, and then I'll be sharing all of your top picks from that poll in the latter half of this video. I've kind of divided my list into three categories. On one hand, there are a few movies on this list whose costuming is just absolutely gorgeous, but they're not really movies that I otherwise enjoy watching. On the other hand, there are movies here that are completely enjoyable to watch and have very good costuming, even if the costumes aren't really anything to write home about. And thirdly, the movies that are just absolutely fabulous on both fronts, with fantastic costumes and good, interesting stories that are just a joy to watch overall. I feel like my choices may actually surprise you. Now, obviously, I have not seen every single period film out there, but I have seen a whole ton, particularly if they're movies that have come out in kind of the last 30-ish years. Let's start with the ones that I think have costumes that are so gorgeous that they outweigh a movie that is otherwise kind of meh to me. Top of this list has to be Marie Antoinette, which came out in 2006 and stars Kirsten Dunst, with costumes designed by Milena Canonero. I think it's one of the most gorgeously costumed films of all time. The entire movie is a visual confection, and Marie Antoinette alone has nearly 70 different costumes throughout the course of the film. The historical silhouettes are made in macaron-colored silk fabrics, and though the costumes are not all 100% historically accurate, the inaccuracies are done quite deliberately. Every costume in the movie is gorgeous, and it's honestly way too hard to choose a favorite. That said, despite the amazing costumes, it's not a movie I enjoy watching due to the acting and the general storyline. Similarly, and from the same era both in setting and in release date, is 2008's The Duchess, starring Keira Knightley, with costumes designed by Michael O'Connor. My favorite costume in this film is definitely her fox riding habit, which I'm very tempted to recreate someday, but every costume in this film is pretty spectacular. Honestly, if you are looking for gorgeous 18th century costumes, you can't go wrong with either of these films, and fittingly, both designers won Oscars for their work. Honestly, these are the only two films on my list whose costumes outweigh otherwise kind of hard to watch movies. Next, let's look at a few movies that are absolutely enjoyable to watch and whose costumes are very good, though maybe not outstanding. In some cases, that might mean there's some flaws in their historical accuracy, and in other cases, it might mean costumes that just don't really stand out, even though they are solidly accurate. First, my favorite movie from when I was a kid, A Little Princess, from 1995, with costumes designed by Judianna Makovsky. Even as an adult, I still think this is an excellent movie, and one of my favorite things about the costumes in this movie is the use of color and texture to help tell a story. It's not one that I tend to think of as a costume movie, and yet the costumes really are quite gorgeous. Some of my favorite costumes in this movie are actually the girls' school uniforms, made in rich shades of green with lovely soutache trimming. Next, one of the most enjoyable 18th century films to watch, in my opinion, is Love and Friendship from 2016, with costumes designed by Emer Nivel-Donig. This movie is actually based on an early novel written by Jane Austen, though it wasn't published during her lifetime. There's really nothing that stands out about the late 18th century costumes in this movie, neither in a good way nor in a bad way, but Love and Friendship is just so funny and entertaining that it is one that I find myself watching over and over.
I'm enjoying St. James's visit to Churchill.
Churchill, that's how you say it, all together like that. I'd heard church. and hill, but couldn't find either. All I could see was this big house.
Several of the older, historically set Hollywood musicals fit into this category as well, such as Hello, Dolly and Meet Me in St. Louis, both designed by Irene Sharaff. The costumes are lovely, and in some cases, I'd say they're even pretty iconic, even though they're not necessarily the most accurate. But the movies are so enjoyable that I often find myself wanting to watch them, and the costumes really do help to tell their stories. From Hello Dolly, my favorite costume is Irene Malloy's window pane skirt ensemble with the super ruffly sleeves. And from Meet Me in St. Louis, to be honest, my favorites are actually many of the ensemble costumes in both the Skip to My Lou scene and also the trolley song scene. Many other older Hollywood musicals also fit into this category, but I think these movies are two of the best. Lastly, a movie that you may not expect, and I think a lot of people actually haven't even seen, the 2011 version of The Three Musketeers, with costumes designed by Pierre-Yves Guiraud. If I were to base this movie solely on the costumes of the King, the Queen, and the Duke, it would actually go into the final category because those three characters have just absolutely stunning costumes. However, the Musketeers themselves often wear some questionable outfits. Milady mostly wears beautiful outfits of a completely different time period than the rest of the movie, and also one very confusing outfit that I can only describe as Saloon Girl. And Constance's costumes would be better worn to visit a Ren fair. But the movie itself is filled with so much cheese, in a good way, fantastic comedy moments, and pretty great action sequences that it's a really enjoyable movie overall. Orlando Bloom chewing the scenery in his colorful array of pumpkin pants really makes this movie for me, and I definitely recommend checking it out, even if there are some issues in the costumes.
Blue.
Your Majesty. Love the outfit. Very retro. We were all wearing those in London. When was it? Last year? Or the year before?
Finally, we have the movies with outstanding costumes, where the movie watching experience itself is also a very enjoyable one. Let's start with one that I think is incredibly underrated, Stage Beauty from 2004, starring Claire Danes and Billy Crudup with costumes designed by Tim Hatley. This movie takes place in the 1660s, during the restoration of Charles II, when women were first allowed on stage. The costumes in this movie are so gorgeous, and my favorite is the orange silk gown worn by both of the lead actors. The acting in this movie is just incredible, and the storyline is fascinating. Since my guess is that many, if not most of you, have not seen this movie, I just want to point out that it is currently available to stream for free on the Roku channel, at least as of the time that I'm filming this video, and I have linked it down below in the description for you. Definitely go check this movie out. One that I think quickly skyrocketed itself as the new favorite for all historical costumers is 2020's Emma, with costumes designed by Alexandra Bryn. The costumes in this movie are basically perfection. Many extant Regency garments were actually reproduced for this movie, such as her pink spencer and the pink sheer gown with the floral embroidery at the bottom. Off the top of my head, the only inaccuracies that stood out to me were Mrs. Elton's much later hairstyle, which was a character choice to make her seem a little more kooky, and a couple of weird neck collar decorations. Plus, the movie is also absolutely enjoyable to watch. No costume movie list would be complete without what I believe is the greatest epic movie of all time, Titanic, from 1997, with costumes designed by Deborah Lynn Scott, who won the Best Costume Design Oscar for her work. Every costume that Rose wears in Titanic has become absolutely iconic, and it's probably the only movie I can think of where each of the main characters' costumes have actually been given their own name, such as the swim dress, the boarding suit, the jump dress, etc. My favorite one is actually her boarding suit, and if I can ever find that right fabric, one where I don't have to paint my lines on a la Morgan Donner or get it from Spoonflower, I will be making this costume. I have already made her deck dress, and I recently did a video on how I made it, which I'll link down below in the description, and I plan to make her swim dress and coat next year. Although everyone in the movie is costumed very well, it's the only period movie that I can think of that has so many iconic costumes for the lead character. Even though it tells a tragic story, and even though it's over 3 hours long, I often find myself rewatching this movie, and I think it will always remain my favorite epic movie of all time. Lastly, we have come to my absolute favorite period costume film, one that I put on whenever I want to watch something with both a beautiful story and some of the most perfect costumes to have ever graced the silver screen. 2009's The Young Victoria, starring Emily Blunt with costumes designed by Sandy Powell, who also won the Oscar for this movie. To me, this is the pinnacle of costuming. Every costume is so gorgeous, with beautiful detailing, sumptuous fabrics and trims, amazing bonnets, perfect hairstyles, etc. And yet, they somehow also read as clothes and not costumes. They rarely take you out of the story because the script, acting, and cinematography are also equally compelling. It's a movie that I find myself turning to over and over in its perfection. I do also want to give out a couple of honorable mentions. First, a movie whose costuming and story are also basically perfection, but which takes place in the late 1930s. Although it doesn't fit the timeline of this list, I just needed to mention it anyway since it's one of my all-time favorite movies, and that is Miss Pettigrew Lives for a Day from 2008, starring Frances McDormand and Amy Adams. The costumes for this movie were also designed by Michael O'Connor of The Duchess, somehow literally in the same year, so it's no wonder that they're so fantastic. And the story is one of the best on film. I cannot recommend this movie highly enough. Second, I just want to mention two movies with iconic historical costumes, neither of which I feel like we think of as costume movies. Sleepy Hollow from 1999 with costumes designed by Colleen Atwood, and the first Pirates of the Caribbean movie from 2003 with costumes designed by Penny Rose. I don't watch either of these movies for their costuming, and yet they really do have wonderful costumes in them. So, as I mentioned in the beginning of this video, I took a poll on Instagram to find out what the general consensus was on the best period costume movies. I had so many responses, and you all listed literally 101 different movies that were your favorites. So I knew I wanted to share those results with you. I'm going to attempt to link to a list of all of these movies down below in the description so that you can discover a lot more historical movies than you've probably ever seen before. But I wanted to share the most popular answers here in this video. These following movies are all movies that received 5 or more votes. Some of them are movies I've already mentioned in this video, and some of them just don't rank in my favorites, but these were your top 14 choices. With 5 votes each, just making it onto this list, are 1988's Dangerous Liaisons, designed by James Acheson, who won the Oscar for this movie, and the famous epic from 1939, Gone with the Wind, designed by Walter Plunkett, which predates the Best Costume Design Oscar by 10 years. It's been a while since I watched Dangerous Liaisons, but I do remember that it had beautiful costumes. That said, the story just never compelled me enough to watch it again. I hadn't watched Gone with the Wind since I was a kid, so I started to watch it again before making this video, but so far I've only had time to watch the first hour and a half of the nearly 4-hour film. I do plan to watch the rest though, because while the story is extremely problematic, the costumes so far, especially in the pre-war scenes, really are beautiful. With 6 votes apiece are 1984's Amadeus, designed by Theodore Pistek, and 1993's Age of Innocence, designed by Gabriella Piscucci, both of whom won the Best Costume Design Oscar for their work. To be honest, I am not sure if I've ever seen Amadeus, so it is one that I will apparently need to watch. I know I had seen Age of Innocence in the past, but that it didn't really stick with me in any way whatsoever, so I tried to watch it again before making this video. That said, the story didn't engage me at all, and I didn't make it very far through before giving up and switching to another period drama. Somehow, The Young Victoria is next on your list with only 7 votes. The only explanation that I can find for this lack of love towards The Young Victoria is that maybe most of you just haven't seen it. So, while I couldn't find it streaming for free anywhere, if you haven't seen this movie, it is definitely worth renting or purchasing. 8 of you said that the 1994 version of Little Women, designed by Colleen Atwood, is your favorite period costume movie. While I have seen this movie a few times, and I do remember enjoying watching it, the costumes just never really stuck with me as anything remarkable. In a 3-way tie with 9 votes each are The Duchess, 2015's Crimson Peak, designed by Kate Hawley, and the 2005 version of Pride and Prejudice, designed by Jacqueline Duran. The fact that Crimson Peak wasn't even nominated for an Oscar is really outrageous to me, as the costumes in that movie really are a feast for the eyes. For me, though, they don't outweigh the horror aspect. I was able to get through it once, but most horror movies are just not for me. And personally, I find the costumes in that version of Pride and Prejudice not only boring, but also somewhat awful despite its Oscar nomination. With 10 votes is another Jane Austen adaptation, the 1995 version of Sense and Sensibility, designed by Jenny Beavan and John Bright. To be honest, while I think this is a nice rendition of the story, it's definitely not my favorite one. That honor goes to the 2008 BBC miniseries. And in my opinion, the costumes are just your standard issue Regency attire. Your number 4 top pick was one that, to be honest, for some reason I never really think of as a period costume movie. 1998's Ever After, also designed by Jenny Beavan. Now, don't get me wrong, I fully enjoy this movie. It is my second favorite version of the Cinderella story after the 2015 version, and I've watched it far more times than I can count. And it does, in fact, contain period costumes. So I honestly have no idea why I never think of it as a period costume film, but I'm glad that you all thought of it. Your top 3 choices are all ones that I already mentioned on my own list. With 19 votes each and tied for second place were Marie Antoinette and Titanic. No surprise there. And in first place with 23 votes was 2020's Emma. If only more movies were costumed like these top 3 with such an eye for detail and accuracy, I think period movies would be so much more enjoyable. So I want to know, was your favorite movie anywhere on these lists? If you didn't participate in my Instagram poll, I would love for you to comment below with your favorite period costumed movies, and I will try to add them to my list from Instagram. Remember, I have linked that full list down in the description if you want to check it out. Also, I'm curious to know if there were any surprises from this list. Maybe things that you were surprised didn't make it on the list, or things that you were surprised to hear did. Please do let me know. And also please let me know if you'd like to see another one of these videos on historical TV series and miniseries. If you like this video though, please make sure to click the thumbs up icon. And if you'd like to see more videos like this from me, please be sure to click subscribe and the little bell icon to be notified every time I post a new video. I do post videos here on YouTube twice a week, with my sewing vlogs out on Tuesdays and other random costuming content like this out on Saturdays, but I post every day over on my Instagram, including fun polls like this one, so please go follow me on Instagram, that's at Lady Rebecca Fashions. And if you'd like to help support all of the work that I do on my channel, I do have a link to my Patreon and my Ko-fi down in the description below, or you can send me a super thanks right here on YouTube. I'd also like to give a special shout out to my Edwardian level patrons, Sharon, Mirage, and Laura. Thank you all so much for joining me today. Have a wonderful week, and I will see you very soon in my next video. Happy sewing!